If you say, oh, I wanna know, right? The first thing you have to acknowledge is that your ignorance can never be circumvented. He who names it shall never know it. Right? This is why, right? In the Kabbalah, right? It's an ineffable name, right? It's a name, right? That you could say Jehovah, right? You could say Yod-Heh-Vah, right? Like you could say these things, right? But it's a name, right? That to speak it degrades it, right? That's the point that they're making, right? And so you symbolize it, right? You put it in, right? Take this for example. Right? This is a fine sigil. Right? That's like, this is a meditation, right? And it's a little wide in place. Like I could have written it better, you know? And just to fully deconstruct this so that we're all on the same page, right? That this is arrived at a very particular construction, right? Which is discussed in a book that's underneath. I'll see if I can get it. One second. I'll pause. Right? That this, right, stems from a specific page in this book, How the World is Made, Jean Michel, right? And so I'm not going to jump to the page right now, right? But the way that you construct it, right, is through making a square of 3 centimeters, right? So it's 3, 3, 3, 3, right? And then you make, from there, you make 2 right angle triangles, 3, 4, 5, right? Pythagorean triangles, right? On either side of the square, right? And so now you have an edge of size 11, right? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, right? And this is used, right, as the base edge length for a square, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And so if you cast a circle inside of the square, right, and then a smaller circle inside of the smaller square, right, and then you put this, the point of the compass right here and your pencil right there, right, that circle that it casts, right, is the same area as the square, right? It squares the circle. And this triangle, right here is the dimensions of the Great Pyramid, 51 degrees, right? Right? So that's the ineffable name of God inside of the Great Pyramid, right? And so I did it up and down, right? You don't have to do that at the bottom, but, right? Been known ancient times, right? But this is a proper expression of it, right? Because you don't have to say it, right? You look at it, right? And so I've touched on this before, right? That language is its own plasmatic vortex of intention, right? That language is a necessary noble divinity just as much as religion, if religion is necessary, right? I allege that it is, because man is a thinking creature. Man is a venerating creature, right? But if you say that life stems from something pure, true, and perfect, right? This comes back to Plato, right? Platonic forms, right? That what we see is a shadow, right, of its pure, idealized form, right? Right? So, inside, right, according to Pribram and Bum, right, that in terms of information in every cubic centimeter of space lies the potential for all of manifested reality, right? And this is the subject of Michael Talbot's masterwork, The Holographic Universe, right? And so I posit that abstractly, perfectly, right, ideally, right, that diffused within every cubic centimeter of space, right, is a twofold expression of the divinity, each equal and necessary, right? The first of which, right, is the scaffold, right, this subquantum superatomic, right, quantum manifold electric waveform of probability, right? that exists as an infinite complex nesting of polyhedra. Here's an example. Right? And the second part of it, right, is the impetus for motion, right, which I refer to often as the divine light of deity. Right? It is the kinetic action exerting pressure, right? That both of them exist diffused within each other, right? Equally in terms of volumetric pressure, perpetually in a state of rest, right? That God is stillness, right? Be still and know that I am God. It says be still more than anything else in the Bible, right? That God is not something within creation. It is the still fulcrum which supports creation, right? And so, eventually, the divine light of deity seeks to express its knowing, right? And exerts pressure, right, as motion upon the structural scaffold, right? And so, if we take this as an example, even though it's falling apart, right? Right, that if all of creation is embedded within this, right, that I could close this in a sphere, cast a circle around it, and call that a great circle because it bisects the volume of the sphere, right? Each degree, 360 degrees around the great circle, is a potential vector of pressure upon the structural manifold, right? That all 360 degrees are their own potential vector of pressure upon the structural scaffold, right? So if it pushes down at the top, right, that's gonna engender one thing, right? Pushes in from the side, it's going to engender another thing. You can have an infinite complex, right? And so the dihedral, right, the specific angle, the specific angel or angels, right, with which the divine light exerts its pressure upon the scaffold reflects what it materializes in the material world, like reflects what it engenders as matter in the material world. And so what's actually occurring is that as the divine light, right, puts pressure upon this structural manifold, it begins to collapse, right? And this is the philosophy, or it's not the science of Buckminster Fuller and the vector equilibrium. That's what's at the inside of this, right, is the vector equilibrium, right? And so, right, the divine light of God exerts pressure upon the structural manifold, right, causing it to collapse, right? And as it collapses, it engenders electric resistance, grating as friction against itself, space grating on space, right? And so as it continues to collapse, right, that kinetic friction continues to increase the levels of electric resistance until, like static electricity, shocking you, it can no longer remain inert space and erupts, right, as a cosmic orgasm into matter. Each dihedral, right, each angle with which it imposes pressure, right, or pressures, right, angles, right, it's an infinite complex, right, reflects what we perceive as measurable matter, right? So, right, I posit, right, this is why we're going, this is why I have this book, right, this is why I made this, right, this is why I'm going through this book, right, this is why, right, I drew that, right? That there is a geometric scaffold, right, that resonates harmonically on all stratas, all convocations, all sizes, forever, right? And so when I take the time, right, to construct these things, right, that I am embedding within my psyche, right, the harmony of this form, right, which is a piece of the divine form that manifests all of life, right? And so when people say, sacred geometry, yeah, flower of life, right? That's fine. Like I've talked about it before. If that's all you need to see, right? If you just need to see Metatron's cube, which is somewhere in this, right? If I put it on paper, right? Then that's fine. Right, but that's only the first level, is what I'm saying, right? But these models, right? This is like real mathematical rigor, right? And so what I'm saying is that these are physical abstractions, right? That this is you can see a soccer ball which has the same design, right? But this is a physical representation of an abstraction, right? Of a piece of the divine quantum hologram, right? And so we're going through this, making every single model in here, right? Because it keeps me tapped into all of creation, right? And thereby, right, makes me a good psychic. I want to say other things, right? But, makes me a good clairvoyant, right? Because I'm tapped into the structural scaffold that resides in every cubic centimeter of space, right? That's the idea, right? And so, right, when you make things like this, right, like this is the guy I emailed, aemanuel, right? The Moloch at the top, that's just me being an asshole, right? Here's his wife, right? That this is another piece of the hologram, right? This is a division of 51, right? 17 equilateral triangles with the ineffable name, right? And so if I meditate on this, right, inevitably I end up at him, and I've never done this because, right, I'm plagued by psychic vampires, right? Right? But if I did, right, I'd find him as long as I'm still, right? Would it happen in an hour, right? Might take me a week, but it might take me an hour, right? Right? Anyone is allowed to say, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. But anyone who has a heart, right? Anyone who has any sort of spiritual bend, right? If they hear those things that I just said, it's really hard to argue them.